The head of Yemen's internationally recognized government has praised the dissolution of the separatist Southern Transitional Council. Rashad al-Alimi says government troops are now in control of the south of the country. They had been fighting the United Arab Emirates-backed separatists for weeks. The disbandment of the STC was announced on Friday in Riyadh. The city is also due to host dialogue between Yemeni parties on a roadmap for the future. The US had offered its support for the process. A new Supreme Military Committee has also been formed to equip and prepare government forces. But this could put it in conflict with the Houthis in the north. The committee has called on the armed group to join the dialogue to ensure a unified Yemen. Al Jazeera's Hashim Al-Barra is in Riyadh. And Hashim, what concern is rising in Riyadh over some of the statements we've been getting from Aden, the latest of which, of course, is the statement from the vice president of the STC saying, hey, not all Southern forces will be happy to join a Saudi-led Supreme Military Council.
Sami, there's been a series of dramatic political and military decisions that were made in South Yemen over the last 2 weeks that took people by surprise to the point they're still grappling with how to move forward. But it's quite obvious that since the last 48 hours, Yemen for the first time, South Yemen, the first time in almost 10 years, it has one political and one military authority. No more military factions, no more divides over how to move forward, and no more divisions over ethnic and sectarian lines for the time being. There is going to be one Supreme Military Committee under the control of President Rashad al-Alimi, and they have two tasks. First one is to restore stability across the south. But as far as the bigger picture is concerned, it will face some momentous tasks in the near future when it comes to taking over the entire of Yemen. Now, the STC, from a Saudi perspective, from the PLC's perspective, is over. That chapter has been turned. Now, there's an invitation which has been extended to many senior members of the South to come to Riyadh and negotiate how to move forward. And I think the consensus is everybody is willing to talk about a federal system, some sort of an enlarged autonomy, but the very notion of separatism is over.
There's talk about putting together another gathering in Riyadh. Any indication of just how much of the universe of parties and actors in Yemen would be attending this Riyadh conference?
There are talks as we speak now in Shabwa, in Aden, in Lahj, in Al-Dhala, Hadramaut, Mahara and Aden, where people are reaching out to different factions, political leaders, on the need to join the conference, which is going to take place here in Riyadh. Now, everybody understands that separatism has been gaining momentum over the past few years in the south of Yemen, and this is something that the conference of Riyadh has to tackle. Now, will people in the south be willing to accept the notion of autonomy or federalism? That remains to be seen. But Sami, 2 days ago, Rashad al-Alimi, who's the chairman of the Presidential Leadership Council, says something very important. For the first time, he said that the Houthis have only one chance, which is basically be willing to negotiate a settlement. Otherwise, it might be a military option. And that potential is going to be the biggest, most significant development Yemen would have seen in 20 years. So we'll have to wait and see in the upcoming weeks. And I think that move, when it comes to the Houthis is concerned, could overshadow all the other developments that we've seen happening over the past few weeks. There is definitely a decision that has been made at the PLC's level, backed by Saudi Arabia, that it's about time to move forward. And for the PLC, they remain to be widely perceived to be as the only legitimate authority. The Houthis, on the other hand, say, we are the only legitimate authority in Yemen. So you can see that you have the PLC and the Houthis on a possible collision course.
All right, thanks so much, Hashim Al-Barra there in Riyadh. Let's take a look at how the Houthis rose to power in Yemen. Well, the group began in the 1990s as a theological movement closely related to Shia Islam. In the early 2000s, the group formally transformed into a militarized movement, involved in several armed conflicts with the Yemeni government. Houthi fighters seized Yemen's capital Sana'a in 2014, and they've since consolidated control over northern Yemen, governing large population centers and key state institutions. Well, this triggered more than 10 years of war with the Saudi-led coalition, which backs the internationally recognized government. The Houthis are supported by Iran. Following the latest developments on the ground, the Houthis said they are open to negotiations with Yemeni factions in the south. Yusuf Mauri is a journalist and political analyst joining us now from Sana'a. So let me start by asking you, Yusuf, is there any diplomacy, any talks going on directly or indirectly between the government and the Houthis at this point?
Well, we suspect that there's always indirect talks taking place. The goal of each side is to be in power. And I think both sides, the Ansar Allah Houthis and the Yemeni government, they realize that there's only two options on the table. One is to negotiate, or the other option, with which your correspondent in Riyadh touched up on, is a full-scale war. So in a way, we are on a course for collision if political negotiations are not established, and if there are no preconditions that would prevent either side from joining the negotiations table. Now, I can tell you firsthand from speaking to Ansar Allah Houthi officials, they will never hold negotiations or engage in negotiations outside of Yemen. And as you mentioned, the Ansar Allah Houthis, they've mentioned that they are willing to negotiate with the southern separatists in the south, but they are not willing to go to Riyadh for this round of Saudi-backed negotiations. I think in a way, when it's all said and done, I think we have, we have the government led by Rashad al-Alimi. They're working on building a coalition because they realize that this is a conflict that's going to be only resolved militarily. So I think the Rashad al-Alimi government is building its military presence, it's building its military units, and it needs the South, and it would prefer that the Southern Transitional Council joins it for the fight with the Ansar Allah Houthis in the future. I think now we're seeing both sides taking up military preparations. I think for the most part, political negotiations have failed. And I've covered Yemen since 2011, and I can tell you that whenever there's talks of military integration by any Yemeni group, it usually means that they want to weaken the other side militarily. Let's not forget the previous ruler, Ali Abdullah Saleh. He was killed, and he ultimately lost after he integrated his military forces with the internationally recognized government. And I can tell you that the Ansar Allah Houthis have learned from that mistake.
Sorry, but listening to what you're saying then, if that means that the Houthis are unlikely to attend the conference in Riyadh, sounds like you're saying then there's little chance they're going to join also this Supreme Military Council. So rather than the Supreme Military Council being a mechanism to unify all Yemeni factions, do you see it becoming a vehicle to rally the anti-Houthi alliance, if we can call it that, against the Houthis? Is that what's happening?
Yes, I think that's exactly what's happening. It's just not being said. I think a lot of these politicians and these political officials, they're speaking in political correct terms, which is why there's lots of confusion. But if we can, if we can just speak frank and be honest, what this is it's military preparation for the war that's awaiting Yemen, both north and south, because the Ansar Allah Houthis have made it very clear they have no intentions of negotiating outside of the country. Rashad al-Alimi, as your report mentioned, he said that the only option that the Houthis have on the table is to engage in the negotiations that's going to take place in Riyadh. Well, that's just simply not going to happen. I think at the end of the day, the Rashad al-Alimi, he's very smart, and I think he wants to use the Yemeni group's rejection of negotiations to garnish more military support, perhaps not just from the Southern movement, but also from international powers, perhaps even from the US. It's history repeating itself whenever it comes to military integration and trying to unify Yemen's military landscape.
Right.
I can tell you that the Ansar al-Houthis, they view this as a threat to their autonomy and their control in the north of the country. Let's not forget, they control 17 provinces. Yemen has 21 provinces that are not under their control, or
Right.
just a couple of other provinces in the south, Shabwa, Hadramaut, and other provinces that are not in their control. But the overwhelming majority of provinces are under the Yemeni group's control.
Right. All right. We'll leave it there. Yusuf Mauri, their journalist. Thank you so much for joining us.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.